All right, so welcome. I see some new faces. That's great. And of course, we have our group that's been with me since the beginning. We were just talking about that. I remember the first day you came in. You had an apron. You had the apron with the tools, all the garden tools. You was like, I think.
And I showed you
You
my.
showed me all your little herbs over there.
Yeah, my herbs up
I
there.
was so happy driving home that day. I was like, ooh, this is fun. Now I'm miserable. No. So this is Chris. Chris works with me now. You've heard me for about 2 years now blabbing that I can't find people that want to work with me. Well, I found somebody. Chris is wonderful. Chris worked at the Salisbury Senior Center and actually left there to come work with me. So I'm really happy with that. And that's Chris's brother, Mike. He's here checking out to see if this might be something he wants to do. He has some specialty areas that he does. So Chris is going to jump in with me kind of back and forth. I want you guys to, if you have questions, insults, just shout them right out, okay? As long as you direct the insults at him. But I think, one of the first things that, when I put this one out, I kept, every morning, there's a term you might have heard. If you're at all a phone person, you read like on news on your phone or Facebook. If you're someone like that, you'll know the term. It's called doom scrolling. And it's when you scroll and it's all bad news and everything. You're like, oh my God, this is awful. And I kept seeing all this horrible stuff about artificial intelligence. And then I read this article that I was at the Stop and Shop self-checkouts, right? And that's what gave me the idea for when I advertised this. I said, I'm sick of the self-checkouts, never mind AI, And I read this article, and it was an attorney, and he had written the article saying why you should never use the self-checkouts. And because he says you put yourself at vulnerable risk because you're trusting the machine. And if the machine doesn't scan something, but they're watching on film, and you're still guilty.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really interesting. So not only now have they pushed the work off onto us to scan our own groceries, now the stress and the liability is all on us too. So I started thinking about that, and I was like, there's got to be better ways to present technology to the world. That here it is, it's more work for you, or here it is, it's less privacy for you. But that is there. That's part of it too. So when I started advertising this, I didn't know what to expect because although you see the name Senior You up there, I think we've talked about that, where I use both names now. It's hard to have a gardening company promote a technology product sometimes. Although in this day and age, maybe it isn't. But one of the things that I think is really important is the idea that we're not afraid of these technologies and that we embrace them and use them to our best advantage that we can, but at least if we don't want to use them, at least be aware of them. And I think that's part of it. So we're going to kind of go through some of them today. Am I too far away? Maybe I might want to shut off. Okay. So just briefly, Senior You, that's Hui. That's his name, the owl. And he gives me advice sometimes. So this is, again, you'll just be seeing this, but I just wanted to introduce that so that people, when you get my emails, particularly Lisa and Heather, as a matter, when you get it, you see this little guy, it's me too. It's not just the therapy garden stuff. So today we're going to talk about, what is artificial intelligence? What are some pros and cons? I'm going to show you some examples of how people use it, how I use it. And not just in my business. I'm going to show you a little bit of my business. I'm going to kind of let you peek behind the scenes and a couple things in my business, but I'm also going to show you how I use some things personally in my life, and I'm sure Chris has some things that he's used. Then we're going to show a little quick demonstration, and then we'll have discussion and questions and anything you want. And if you have a question throughout, please just ask it. There are no dumb questions. Okay, there aren't. So the first thing is let's kind of look at some of the terms here. So you have these terms that are floating around out there that everyone has heard, and I like to just kind of nail down a definition for people so that we all kind of are on the same page before we go. So when we look at virtual reality, so to me, virtual reality is that's the headsets. People, you've seen those now. People wear the headsets, or something that's an immersive experience. So that's what virtual reality is. And now you're seeing these headsets come about where they're calling them, what are they now? The hybrid. Some you can see through, and some it's virtual. So it's
augmented reality.
Augmented. So augmented reality. That's the next term you're going to start hearing. Augmented reality. So I did buy one of these virtual reality visors. It was a lot of money, but it was a business expense for me, so I felt okay about it. I went, and I'll tell you what I did. I read an article in the New York Times, and there was this woman who decided that she was going to lock her. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York with her husband and children, and she had to write a story about virtual reality. They had, hired her to do that. So she locked herself in her bedroom for essentially 2 days, a whole weekend, and just interacted with this virtual reality, and then she wrote about it. So I read the article, and I was drinking my coffee. It was like 5:30 in the morning. I read the article, and I was tapping my foot by 8 o'clock, waiting for Walmart to open. And I walked in, and there was this little girl working there. She looked like she was 12 to me, but I don't know. And I said, I don't know anything about it. I want a virtual reality headset. I just read an article on it. I need to learn about this for my business. It's the coming thing. And she was like, oh, you want this and that? She set me all up, gave me everything I need, and I took it home, and I played with it for about 2 or 3 weeks, and the novelty wore off very quickly, and I felt stupid sitting there with a headset on my face, talking. I lived alone, and you're talking to it. It was very interesting, but it's not life-changing. It's not anything. It's something that you could take or leave. Artificial intelligence is something that's life-changing. So artificial intelligence goes well beyond. Oh, there they are! Wow, my fan club. Here they are. Come on in. Come on in. Have a seat. Wonderful. We're on the first slide, so that's perfect. Perfect. How are you guys doing? Good?
Good.
Yeah. How's gardening going? Gardening going okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Too much rain for me.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah. So the other things there, you have chat bots or bots, and those are things that, people that you talk to, or a lot of times now they're on the phone. So when you're talking, so that's why, you're already interacting with a lot of the stuff and you don't know it. For, a really good example that I like to use is in the insurance industry, and I don't know the exact percentage anymore, but at one time, it was something like 80 to 90% of all insurance claims were either approved or denied at the first level by artificial intelligence, meaning a human had never even weighed in on the decision. And how they do that is they look for loopholes. And they look, oh, the date's wrong. They have the machine scan through, oh, date's wrong, kick it back. Oh, didn't fill this section out, kick it back. So that's the kind of the first generation that you've seen of this artificial intelligence where it's buzzing through things. Now this kind of new generation of it is it's not only buzzing through things, it's adding content. It's writing what we would consider original content. And then you have deep fakes. Deep fakes, you probably have heard that term in the news and stuff like that. These, to me, this is the most scary of all of them. Deep fakes are the, hire someone who has my calendar and my schedule and knows exactly where I am and what I'm doing at every minute of the day. And this is what he calls 11:15. At an 11 o'clock presentation. It's very difficult to find good help. So,
Maybe he thinks you talk fast.
he must, yeah, he must. So, so deep fakes, these are the ones that are the most scary to me. These are the ones that you can't tell if a video has been altered or not. These are the ones that, it used to be just a photograph and it was a fake, photo. You've heard that term, a photoshopped photograph. Now it's a video. Now it's audio. Now it's very, very scary. So to me, that becomes a little more scary than the artificial intelligence piece because I actually see the artificial intelligence as a tool that can actually be used for good, whereas I don't see a reason for a deep fake at all. I can't think of a reason that you would need a deep fake for any good reason at all. I just can't think of one. So that's kind of how I work it out in my mind. And you might have a different opinion, and that's okay. I want you to have an opinion on this because this is very important. We were just chit-chatting beforehand about the idea of homework. I bet many of you have grandkids. And I don't know about you, but if I were a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old kid and someone said to me, write a 5-page paper on such and such, I wouldn't go use ChatGPT. I would just say no. I would say I'm not doing that because it's useless. It's a useless exercise now. There are other ways of learning that information than making someone do a skill that can essentially now be done for you. Doesn't mean that they don't need to know how to do that skill, they do, but to have to prove it over and over and over again doesn't make sense to me. So that's what we're facing in society. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So for our purposes, the definition of what is artificial intelligence, it's the simulation of human intelligence and it's programmed for it makes machines act like humans. It's really just about conversation. So you can ask it things in a conversational term. You can ask artificial intelligence to act as a person, and we'll talk about more as we go through there. You can ask it to ask as an expert, or tell it to act as an expert in answering questions for you. And it does it, they call this natural language processing. And again, this is all stuff that you've already interacted with. So every time you call and they say, remember you used to have to always would press 1 for this, 2 for, now you can say it, right? That's artificial intelligence. They're hearing what you're saying and responding appropriately, sending you to the right person, hopefully responding appropriately, sending you to the right department or person or a thing like that. And so you've heard ChatGPT, right? You've seen that in the news, ChatGPT. Everyone calls it that. So that's a product of the company that interfaces with everybody else. So they take their product and they allow, like say I wanted to have a chat bot on my website. I would use ChatGPT. I'd buy that and install it on my website. And you wouldn't know. It'd be a behind the scenes thing. So that when you see the ChatGPT, that's what it is. All right? So this is what's pretty much has everyone up in arms at the moment right now, if you're following the news at all. So AI can perform many tasks much better than humans, and it does it with a very high level of accuracy. It really does, but it's not 100%. And I wonder if you remember this in the news, and I picked this headline on purpose because I liked the word that they used. They used the word gibberish. Did you guys see this case? So it's 2 lawyers, and I had always wondered about this. So this is a perfect example of where the human element is really important. So you know when lawyers argue a case in front of a judge, and then they'll say to them, well, judge, there's past precedent for this. And then they tell them all the cases that have been ruled before. In Plessy versus Ferguson, blah, 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 the court ruled this. And in, Griswold versus Connecticut, they offered this. And then they give that to the judge. And the judge is supposed to take that into account. That's called stare decisis. It means, previous decisions should count towards, so you're consistent, right? Well, these guys did that, but they used ChatGPT. And I always wondered, did they check those things? Like, couldn't a lawyer just lie and say, I found this case and, just make it all up? Well, no, because they submitted it and they looked it up and it was all fake. ChatGPT had made up the whole thing, cases, people, the situations, the whole thing was phony. And the judge went wild. And he's like, how could you, and he fined them $5,000. And one guy was the attorney of record, but he wasn't even really part of it. He just happened to be the original attorney, and they had a specialist, and he got sucked into the whole thing. And the interview, I wish I had the interview with the guy, I couldn't find it, but they asked me, like, would you have done this again? He's like, I never would do this again. This was terrible. So you have to be very careful, but one of the things I'm going to show you is how you get around that. And really, it's very simple. The good news is you use prompts and you just tell it to use factual information. Because that's the thing, where it's artificially intelligent, if you don't tell it not to do something, it will go do it, right? I've had a problem when I first started using it. The thing was like my ex-wife, it blabbed forever. And she doesn't live in Central Mass, so I can. And I'm kidding. She was wonderful. She is wonderful. If you tell it not to lie, it won't lie to you. That's the thing. But if you don't put parameters on it, it'll go forever. So too many times I've said, list some reasons why my knee might hurt. Well, 5 minutes later, it's still writing reasons, and I wanted it, and I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. Now I say, list the top 5 reasons why my knee might hurt. You know what I mean? So as long as you give it some little small parameters like that, it makes its use a lot easier. And we'll talk more about that afterwards. So let's talk about how we got here, because it's kind of interesting how we got to this point. And when you think back, I would say pretty much the World War II generation is pretty much gone now, I think, for the most part. I think the last surviving World War II veteran passed. I'm not sure, though. But when you think about someone from that generation and all the change that they saw, from the advent of cars to television to the internet to medicine to where we are now, and now think about what the next generations are going to see with this. It's really amazing to kind of look back and see how far we've come. So in respect to artificial intelligence, in the 1950s and the 60s is when they first started talking about this. And in fact, that's when the term was the term artificial intelligence was coined. And the very first thing was a checkers playing program. And they had done, it was all mathematical, and it, printed it all out. It wasn't like a really, fun way to play, but they were, getting somewhere. Then all of a sudden, Eliza came through. So Eliza was a chatbot for mental health, and it was supposed to give you ideas of things that you could do, like, oh, I'm not feeling well. You can go outside and take a walk. And it was kind of like that. It was supposed to be for therapists to use with their patients, like in conjunction with them. And then they just it didn't go in that direction. It ended up going in this direction, in the industrial direction. So the first one that we really had, the first industrial robot, was in the 60s. It was actually designed in the late 50s, though. And it revolutionized manufacturing. That's what started the whole robotics thing. And that's where you started to see the replacement of frontline workers, right? You started to see factories shrinking a little bit over the 70s, really the 80s, you started to see a lot of it go overseas. And this was really the beginning of that, So this is a word I'm going to use in a little while. This was a disruptor, right? So this disrupted the manufacturing industry. What's interesting, I think, about artificial intelligence is it will disrupt multiple industries. And disruption isn't always bad. You can think like Uber. Uber was a disruption that probably turned out to be better for the consumer. If you think about it, I don't know if it's better for the cab drivers, probably not. But Uber is probably better for the consumer. It's probably cheaper to get around now and probably easier to get around now. So that disruption was probably a good thing for transportation. So then you had, it was kind of dormant for a while, and then there was a big leap forward taken in the late 90s and kind of the early 2000s. And do you remember Deep Blue? The chess machine, IBM, played the chess champion and beat him. Played the world chess champion and beat him. And he was, if you remember back, Garry Kasparov, he was not thrilled with that. He felt like he didn't play well, but he also was rattled. He was clearly rattled, and he was like, it doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't make, because that's really, if you think about games like chess, or even any professional level, it really comes down to who makes the first mistake as to who wins. Like in baseball, you can have a pitcher that can, mow down, the side 5 or 6 times, leave one ball up, it's a home run, and you lost. So who made the first mistake? So that's kind of what he was getting at, was this is going to be big for us. And then you had in 2011, Watson went on the game show Jeopardy and won. That's pretty big too. That's pretty big. That's a pretty big recall. And this one is not artificial intelligence, but this one, I included this. This was my own personal awakening, I think, when this happened. Does anyone know this story? So in 2012, this is a fascinating story, and it didn't get the attention that I thought it should have. And the reason I included it here is I want you to remember that this was 10 plus years ago. Think about that. So there was a New York Times article that broke that Target had, you become a rewards member and you scan your little key tag and all that stuff. Target knew that their women customers were pregnant before they knew. Think about that for a minute. Target, the company, knew that their customers who were pregnant before the actual woman knew that she was pregnant. And they did that by analyzing their sales. Hit the side. There you go.
Oh, shut up.
This technology of ours.
I hate
You
it.
got it?
Why don't we all silence our phones?
Yeah. It's all right.
Thank you.
There you go. Don't forget, I used to teach high school, so this is a piece of cake. This is a piece of cake. This is enjoyable. So when you think about that, so what they did is they analyzed all the data, and they found, one of the big things they found, that their buying habits had changed from scented to unscented lotion. That's simple, right? And I've never been pregnant, so I don't know, but I am told that there are, when in early pregnancy, sometimes you hyper smells and things like that can really bother you. Then there were other products that they were buying, like upset stomach antacids, you know, and Target put them all together and then started mailing them coupons for diapers. It was before the women even knew they were pregnant. Think about that. And that was a little blip. It made the New York Times, I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but now take that capability with what we're talking about now. Now we're talking about predictive technologies and things like that. And are we at the point where maybe we're going to be able to predict when you're going to die? I mean, that's a heavy thing to think about if you really, really think about it. So I think that's where a lot of this is coming from, is they hear AI and they get scared because A, it's an unknown, but they also think back to what the experiences that they do have, and some of those experiences can be kind of scary, you know. So then we jump to 2022, and this is when you have the major breakthroughs in the AI tools that came about. So now you have that, what we talked about earlier, ChatGPT, you have DeepMind, that's Google's kind of version of it, and then you have DALL-E, that's also ChatGPT. DALL-E is one that it does artwork. So all you do is you type in a picture of a man riding a horse in a meadow with purple flowers, and it creates that picture for you. So you think about it, you know, you're a designer or you run a website or something like that, you're going to use this type of tool. You know, there's just no doubt about it. So now let's look at kind of our present day, where we're at right now. So what can AI do right now? So the first thing that AI can do is it can perform almost any human task around learning and reasoning, problem solving, decision making. And I could rattle off, once I realized how popular this workshop is going to be, I think we have probably 25 in the books over the next few months. I said, I have to really make myself, and Chris has to make himself an expert in this. So I've spent I lay in bed at night sometimes with the lights off and the phone and just play around with the AI. And I've asked it all kinds of things. And to the point where I can see where people could go down a rabbit hole and start depending on this, where you ask it advice and things like that. And I'm going to show you some of that a little bit later on. But it really does, it takes the guesswork out of a lot of stuff for you. It will sift through all kinds of information and arrive at a conclusion. And I'll give you one that I'm not particularly proud of, but I'm going to tell you what I did because it's not, it was not illegal or anything like that. It's not even that bad. But so as an entrepreneur, I'm reading this book. It's called Profit First. And the idea of the book is, the old way of thinking about profit is you say sales minus expenses equals profit, right? So how much you generate minus what it costs you to generate, and the rest is yours. You're the owner, you get to keep it. So this guy says, no, forget that. He says, now it goes profit plus expenses equals sales. He said, so the first thing you do is decide how much money you want to make on a particular job, and then let everything else fall into place. Because the whole point of this is for you to make money. I read it, I was like, oh, that's brilliant, right? But here's the thing: you had to buy the book. I'm reading the book. The guy's got to fill a book, right? So now he's telling a story about his brother-in-law, and he's telling a story about this and a story about that. He's like, and soon I'm going to tell you the formula. In another minute, I'm going to tell you the formula. And then there's another whole chapter. So finally, I got bored, and I went to ChatGPT, and I went, what is the formula for the book Profit First? Bang. I didn't finish reading the rest of the book. And I have to be honest about that. And that's a major change, right? Is that, I don't know, is that a copyright violation of that guy's book? I don't think it is. I'm not sure. But that's how things have changed now. I can't envision myself. I love fiction, and I will continue to read fiction. I will not give up fiction. But I cannot see myself reading another nonfiction book strictly for informational purposes. Again, I really can't. Unless it was something like, a narrative about, maybe how a ship was built or something like that. But if they told it as a way of a story, maybe. But anything factual now, just give me the facts. I think that's where we're at. So some common uses in business for AI, you see it in customer service all the time. Here's another one, lead generation. As an entrepreneur, I depend on email. Almost, I would say 98% of my sales are done via email. So I blast out an email newsletter, and folks like Heather and Lisa, if something catches their eye and they go, oh, that's interesting, then we connect and we figure it out, right? That's how I do things. I'm also a little bit disorganized. So best practice is whenever I meet somebody, immediately they should go on my email list, right? Because they're a potential customer. So that's the first thing I should do when I go home after I meet new people is I should, make sure I take a little time every day and make sure that email, because that drives the engine, right? That is the engine that drives the bus. I don't do that because I'm, whatever, scattered, I'm driving, I'm lazy, whatever it is, I'm not doing it. So I found this little program, we're talking about lead generation. It was free, I don't even know how they make money, and all you do is you put in your email inbox, and it scans it, and it pulls out everybody's first name, last name, and email address, so you can just dump it into your program. That alone, I would have had to pay somebody to go through that, and it would have cost me $400 in labor alone just to get that done. And it did it in like 9 seconds. And I had everyone's email address that I had been communicating with all in one place neatly so I could send it all to them right away. That's the power of some of this, just in small things, Fraud detection. AI is now trained to look for patterns of fraud. We were talking about fraud beforehand. Do you guys have someone that comes in and talks to them about fraud occasionally?
Yes, you do.
Oh, yeah, okay, who does? Like the police department do it? Or, yeah, okay. So that's all, we were just chatting about that, and like that's really important, even more important now with some of these new things that we're talking about. But AI is really good at detecting fraud, and probably the best example I can give you is your bank. So if you do any type of online banking or telephone banking or anything like that, they now have algorithms that if you step outside your kind of habits, they send you a text or a call you immediately. And it's happened to me at least 4 times, and once it's been fraud, and every other time it's been me doing something that I didn't ordinarily do. But I liked that about it, that they noticed. And one of the calls was just, Mr. Wheeler, we noticed you trying to withdraw $300 in cash. You've never once withdrawn cash from this account. That's interesting, and it was a recording call, it wasn't even a person, but still, that's a use for good. Quality control, that's been in place for a long time. You've seen, we just saw the robotic arms and stuff like that. And the data scraping, that falls under lead generation. That's that idea of going through and pulling out data that's freely available that you can put it in a format that you can use. So now, this is probably the one that will be the most life-changing for us in our lifetime. Some of these things that we're going to see later on might take 20, 30, 40 years. This stuff will affect us right now. There's already medical imaging and diagnostic being done on x-rays and things like that. And if you look, most x-rays, a lot of times if you have an emergency x-ray, what did they used to do? Do you know where they would send it? They would send it to another country. They would send it to, like India or something like that, where they're awake when we're asleep. And they would do a cursory read and send it back. Well, that's not necessarily needed anymore. Now AI can kind of scan through that. And I use this as a perfect example of myself. I had something done, I had an MRI on my leg, and the radiologist said there was nothing there. And then the scan said there was something on my toe called a leucine. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. I had to look it up. It's just a little soft spot where it's supposed to be bone. It's a bruise. I probably had broken my toe at some point, didn't know it. But interesting that the little AI piece caught it when the person didn't. Now you can imagine if that were cancerous, wow, that's a pretty big deal, So some other uses, virtual assistants, Alexa, Siri, things like that. Does anyone use those? Anyone use Alexa? Use Alexa. Yeah. So when my mom was alive, I bought her an Alexa. And actually my brother bought them. And he put them all in all different rooms. And my mother's struggles with technology were legendary. I've written entire books about it. They were legendary. I missed them, to be honest with you. And this was a great one. So I came to see her one day, and I sat down, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. We had coffee, and I said, "Ma, how do you like the Alexa thing?" She goes, "Oh, it doesn't work." I said, "What do you mean it doesn't work?" She goes, "It doesn't. It gives me the silent treatment. It doesn't answer me." She goes, "Siri, tell me the weather." I said, "Ma, it's Alexa, not Siri. You call it the wrong name." So it's pretty important that you have to call them the right name first. So that's important. But GPS and navigation, if you've used that, That's artificial intelligence, to the point now where it reroutes you right in the middle of traffic. You could be heading along. It did it to me today. Every other time I've come up here, I've come Route 2. This time it had me go the Pike, and I just was curious, so I looked it up when I pulled in, and there was a big pile up on Route 2. And it just knows. I don't even know how it knows, you know, but it does. It knows, and I will say this for GPS and artificial intelligence: every time I've overruled the GPS, I've been sitting in traffic. Every time I've been with it, I've been sitting in much less traffic, let's put it that way. Facial recognition, you know, does anyone have that on their phone right now? No? So I have that on my phone. You must have it on your phone, yeah. You know, so now you don't even need passwords if you set it up for facial recognition. You don't want to do that?
I have to just.
That's it. Oh, and that's fine. You know, again, these aren't things I'm not, you know, I use some of these things, not all. I'm not advocating that you need to do these things at all. I want you to know what they are and you know what's coming down the road. And also, I don't want you to feel left out by it. Like when people start talking about, well, I can do that. I want you to at least know what it is they're talking about. You don't have to be interested in it, but you know. I once read a management. I wasn't really a big sports person when I had my first business. And I read this management book, and it said, if you're not a sports person, but you work in a sports industry, and I did, I had a golf clothing company. And the advice was, read one sports article every day, and just talk about that. Whenever people bring up sports, go, oh, hey, did you see the article about something? And I did that for a year, and it worked perfectly. You know, so there's nothing wrong with doing stuff like that. And then, of course, social media monitoring, that's another one that, you know, swears and inappropriate things online. Those are all bots that do that now. They're programmed to just stop the conversation if it goes in a direction it shouldn't. And then recommendation systems, and I'm going to show you one that I actually use that you, if you're a reader, you might want to use. I'm trying to give you things that you might actually, you know, use. So this is it. This is called, the website is called whichbook.net, N-E-T. And all you do is on the left are slider bars. And you slide it and you say, I want more funny or more serious. I want more violent or less violence. I want it set in the winter or I want it set in the spring. Or I want a historical thing or I want, you know, a slim thing. And then all those books pop up on the right as you move the slider around. It says you might like this, you might like that. And you also put in other books that you like and have read, and it goes through, and what it's done, how it does it, is it goes through and it reads the whole book, and then it assigns a mood to it, you know, based on that, or a location, and then you can search for it. So I had a really hard time finding books to read. I'm very particular. I don't like series. I don't like, you know, things like that. I like, you know, unique kind of things, and I'm very, one of the things I do when I find an author I like, I probably read everything that they've written, you know, I work my way through. But if you're like that, you end up with no one to read because you work your way through everybody, and you're always looking for a new author. This has been a godsend for me, because I can't tell you, there's no bookstores left to go to, right? I mean, where I live in Brockton, there isn't, I don't think we have a bookstore for 10 or 12 miles. You know, so, and we're a city, which, I mean, that seems foolish to me. But now you have tools like this that I can do this, you know, go through and I can order 3 or 4 books at a time. I still like to read. I read on the Kindle, but I also like hard copies. So I still get them. And like I said, I've finished about 3 of them that I've got off this. So it's been a really good recommendation system.
What was that again?
It's called whichbook.net, N-E-T. And
You
it's
never
out.
got that.
What's that? You
I
got
told Heather to read it.
Okay, there you go. She's got it. I need a Heather walking around with me to tell her to remember things. So this next one, I'm going to give you a little peek behind the curtain of my business, right? So Heather and Lisa know, I send out my brochure, my catalogs. And one of the things that I've noticed is people don't read they don't scroll down. You know, they read the first couple lines. Whatever I put at the top of an email sells. Whatever I put at the bottom of an email doesn't sell. And that tells me people aren't scrolling down because they're you know, similar products. So I said, I have to get more efficient. All I did, that's the description that I wrote on the left for my Get Better Sleep project program that I do. And I put it in AI and I went, reduce this to 1 sentence. And that's what came up. Learn how to improve your sleep quality through routine adjustments, mental tips, and healthy eating habits. Now I want you to think about, I have 75 courses that I teach. So I did that 75 times. If I had to do that 75 times by myself doing it, that's a whole weekend. That's an entire weekend of sitting in front of a, because there's also the human element where you overthink things. Oh, does that really sound right? When really no one cares, right? Should a comma belong there? At the end of it, do you guys even notice? You wouldn't even notice that. But a human will obsess over that, or at least I will, a weird human. Will obsess over stuff like that. But you know, now think about that. Now, forget me, I'm a little small-time person. 75 times would take me 2 days. Imagine companies that have 75,000 catalog entries. And they can do this in the blink of an eye. They can reduce it down to something that fits, you know, on a cell in a spreadsheet, you know. So it's really amazing what the things that you can do.
I actually have an interesting story about that. My niece is running for city councilor in Medford. And I was like, let me see how I can use AI to help her out. So I went on her website, and she's got all her, you know, all her policies and all that. I took it all, copied it, put it into ChatGPT, and I said, give me 4 or 5 stump speeches, about 5 minutes long, and give me a bunch of elevator pitches, really short, highlighting different policies. And it spit out something that you would pay a political speechwriter. Yeah. It spit out really nice things, and I sent it back to her, and she was overjoyed. Something that you would have had to have a professional speechwriter generate for you. It literally did it in seconds.
Yeah, yeah. I have a guy that works with me and does some writing for me. He does some blog stuff, and he luckily is a friend of mine, so you know I could say this, but I looked at him and I said, "Oh, you're fired. I don't need you anymore. I just replaced you with it." I didn't, but you know, people are worried. It's the Hollywood writer's strike. That's what this is about. You know that, right? You've read about the Hollywood writer's strike. It's all about artificial intelligence, the whole thing, because you can describe it. Chris,
yeah, so when you hire a writer to write a TV show, it costs a lot more to hire them to write the initial draft, because anyone who's written knows the most imposing thing is that blank sheet of paper. So hiring a writer to write the first draft of something, they get the most money for that. Then if you bring another writer in to rewrite it, to tweak it, to do this, you can pay them less because they're already working with something. So a lot of times now they're using AI to generate that first draft. So they can pull the writer in and say, well, you just need to do a rewrite on this. We already have the first draft, so we can pay you less. And I was also telling them earlier that one of the other things is now you have a lot of series that only have 6 episodes in a Netflix series or something like that. It used to be if you were a television writer, you knew you had 20-something episodes. You could write 1 year on one show and be okay. Well, now that show is only 6 episodes. But the contracts are not structured, so they can actually go out and find other work. And so the writers are unfortunately getting harassed.
Right. But it's, you know, AI is at the heart of this negotiation, and it's, you know, the idea of who's going to get paid to do work and who isn't, and that's really what it is. You know?
Redefining.
And you know, Chris and I and other folks in my circle that I hang around with, we take the approach, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So we're going to jump in and we're going to make sure that we're relevant. I mean, you know, Lisa, you probably, I don't know, sometimes I've been going to spam lately, but I've started doing professional development on AI, and I'm doing that for a reason, because I know the inclination. I used to work for a school system, so I understand municipal thinking. Municipal thinking is, and I don't necessarily mean Lisa, I mean the town, is don't make waves, don't get us in trouble, don't, you know, nothing new, but this is upending everything. And people need to know what this is to be able to use it to their advantage, or they're going to find someone that's going to replace them with this. You know, that's my thing, is, you know, learn to use it. I think it's going to make strong, smart, motivated people even stronger, smarter, and more motivated. That's what I think is going to happen.
It's interesting. They're saying now that this could be as profound as the invention of the printing press.
I think it is.
Probably even more so. More of a like, this is a moment that everything changes because of artificial intelligence. Because it can think and do the work of literally like hundreds of people in seconds. Some, not all work.
Yeah, not all, some. So ChatGPT stands for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer. You can tell some egghead came up with this, right? I mean, this is a science name if I've ever heard one. But it's used in customer service, multilingual support. We talked about all these things, the chat bots, the voicemail, all that stuff. That's what ChatGPT is, okay? So that's what you're interfacing with. Let's talk about the business end, because a lot of people don't talk about this. Very interesting. OpenAI, that's the company that owns them. And I use the word company on purpose because they started as a nonprofit. And then they realized that a couple things happened. One, being a nonprofit limited them from accepting donations and investments from businesses and outside companies. So they decided, or they did decide, to somewhat undo the nonprofit and become a for-profit laboratory. So they do have a part that's still a nonprofit, but they're in it to make money, and they make a lot of money off of computer games and selling the ChatGPT as part of apps and things like that. They were founded in 2015, okay, so that's 8 years ago, and they're currently valued at $29 billion. You know, so I mean that tells you like that's wow, that's just amazing. Not publicly traded, so it's privately owned corporation.
And the creators of it, actually, the reason why they said they did it like that is we were going to get to that kind of artificial intelligence. Somebody was going to get there. They've been working on this stuff since, like you said, back in the 50s and 60s. You can teach a computer to do chess and simple things. You give it some information, and it can think very simply. What's changing now is these things can actually, in a weird way, think. And that's so they knew that somebody was going to get there, and so their idea was that we're going to get there first so we can put some guardrails on it. Because, and this is a very strange thing, do you know how it does what it does? It predicts what word would come next.
As
As crazy as that is to think, that's how it does what it does. There were two roads when they came to teaching a machine to think. You can try to make it simulate the human brain, and there's a bunch of people working on that, and that hasn't really worked. And then there were other people saying, well, I think a better way to do it is give it a lot of information and teach it to be able to predict logically what word should come next. And that's what it's constantly doing. When you ask it a question, it's thinking for a second and starting to say stuff. And as it does, it says, well, what would the next word be? And then puts it, what would the next word? And it's doing all that in the blink of an eye. And it's just coming out with all this stuff because it's saying, well, I think the next word would be this. And that's crazy to think about.
It is. It's really amazing. I mean, think about how complex language is. It's particularly the English language. I mean, I wouldn't want to be, you know, a non-native English speaker trying to learn this language. It's very difficult. And now they're not only doing that, they're translating it into all this, you know, computer stuff. So prompts. This is the key to using. I use a little cattle prod there. This is the key to using AI. Goes back to what I said at the very beginning. You have to tell it what to do. You have to tell it to tell you the truth. You have to tell it to keep things short. You can tell it to put things in a certain format. And the best way that I have found to do it is tell it what to do and then give it an example. Just like people. You know, if you think about it, when you teach somebody, you might say, oh, you know, let's the color green. That's green. There's an example. You know, so people learn better that way. This does too. And you can phrase them as a chat where you can say, I want you to act as a dietitian and give me, you know, answer my questions, or you can just tell it what to do. I tell it what to do. I feel stupid talking to a machine and saying, pretend to be this. But if you like that, if, you know, and that's what, a lot of people do like that, and that's fine. Like, but I felt stupid with that visor thing on my head too, so, you know, maybe it's me.
And the prompts can be quite long. Like the ChatGPT, the prompt itself, the thing you use to ask it to do it, it can be 20,000 words long. So the prompt literally can be 20,000 words. You can tell it, give it all this stuff and say, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, and you hand it to it, and it will go through it real quick and suddenly think.
Keep going, because I'm gonna hook up the internet.
Okay.
Bayview 211. Good.
So here's an interesting story about, so there's a scientist who's talking about how good are these AI things, right? And what he said is that if he asks it questions about stuff there's not a lot of data on, it's not very creative. And that's the thing, is they've loaded these artificial intelligence stuff with tons of data, tons of just whatever, and now it has a basis of knowledge, but if you ask it something outside of that, it has a harder time. But this was an interesting one. He said, just kind of kidding around, he says, does this prompt make me look fat? And the AI thought for a second and responded, well, I'm a machine learning thing. That's a question I can't answer. And he said, okay, well, what if I was a wife asking that of the husband? He was curious what the AI would say. And the AI kind of thought for a second and said, sometimes a question isn't asked to get the information, it's a prompt to make, it actually had an emotionally intelligent answer as to what the response should be if somebody says, does this make me look fat? Like it's factual is not necessarily the direction you want to go there, but the fact that the AI understood there was a difference that's one of those things that has scientists, because the other part of this, which is fascinating, is they can't really tell you how it does what it does. They know what it does, and they know that they made it do it, and it does it pretty well. But if you really pin them down to say, well, how is it doing this? They would all go, we're not sure. And that's the other part of this, which is just interesting, is that they're teaching a machine to think. A machine that can hold a lot more information than we can. And so it's just something to keep in mind. Like Dave was saying, it's a tool. And it's a tool that it has already made your life better without you knowing it. It's just been basic versions of this. This is the souped up version that is now out. And it still has the ability to make your life better. Could you imagine if each kid had an individualized tutor that paid attention to their learning speed and adjusted the lessons accordingly? Yeah, I can do that. Like, that's the ability, that's the kind of thing that the potential is there for. That each kid could just log on and have essentially feel like they're talking to a human being, but they're really talking to an AI, but that AI will take the information, like really literally tutor them. Doctors, I think he's talking about radar technicians, right? The best radar, what am I'm looking for, not radar, the scans. Why can't I find it?
Radiologist.
Radiologist, I mean radar. Radiologist, but the best one has seen maybe, what, hundreds? Maybe if they've been doing it for 30 years, maybe they've seen thousands of films. Now you put it in an AI that's literally seen millions. It's going to be able to pick out that things that maybe only happen. So it's things like that AI is not something to be afraid of. There is some fear out there because there are some questions, and it's going to have to make us rethink some things that we didn't think we were going to have to do this early. But it's also going to have the ability to really add to our lives. And
All right, I'm gonna do one. You ready? Can you guys see this? If you want to come up close to see, you can. But I'm gonna put something in right now. So let's see you, and I have no idea what's gonna happen here. So let's see what happens. But I'm gonna put in. Give me a topic. Someone give me something you're interested in.
that's tough.
Gardening.
Got it. Yes.
Gardening. All right. So let's put in something about gardening. Let's see.
Best way to grow rhubarb.
Sure.
It's simply like using Google. You just type it in like you would type. Like,
So here's what I typed. You ready? I typed, please tell me how to plant and care for, harvest, and cook rhubarb. Include 3 recipes. Let's see what happens. One, choose a suitable location. And then it's got a bunch of information there. Prepare the soil. Planting the crowns. Rhubarb is typically grown from crowns, rather blah, blah, blah. Watering and mulching care. Look what it's doing. Can you see it?
And
Look.
it's doing that
Rhubarb
by-
crumble. Ingredients. Look at instructions.
It's predicting what word comes next.
It's still going on.
Okay, so do you have to have ChatGPT on your?
This is a website, open.ai. It's all-
Even if you just Google ChatGPT, it'll take you there. It'll take you. The idea of this is ChatGPT is the model that they put out so everybody can play with it. It's like putting the car in the showroom so everybody can come
Look what it
and
just
do
did.
it.
Look what it did at the end. Remember, rhubarb leaves are toxic, so make sure to remove them and only use the edible stalks in your recipes. I didn't know that. Right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you another one. I'm gonna ask something like that Lisa might do, all right? Because so you might do, let's say you're having a coffee hour, okay?
So they're sort of showing you the model, and then developers get access to this behind the scenes so they can integrate it. AI is getting integrated into a lot of other things now. And this is just sort of like showing you, here's the floor model. People can type in commands and see what it does. It's also being used by companies that are putting it into technologies to make it a little bit better. Here's an example of things that AI is being used for. And I think Dave was touching on this earlier. It takes longer to write a short email than it does a long email. Because a short email, if you're trying to keep things brief, actually takes some brain power. But if you just ramble on, you can ramble 5 pages and get the information out. It's just going to be a pain for the person speaking it. AI has this way, like he did. He took all that text, right? You can go even further, and it took it down and smushed it down. Well, you have another thing where you can feed AI your writing style. Here's emails I wrote. here's another one, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. So write me an email to this client and tell them these 3 things, but make it long and be pleasant. And the AI will go, okay, and it'll take your writing and it'll look at it and it'll say, okay, and it'll sound just as close to you as you probably couldn't even tell the difference. And then that is an email.
I gotta run after this, but he can stay in black all he wants. All right, you ready? So, Lisa has decided that she wants to plan an afternoon tea social for 10 senior citizens. Include 3 kinds of tea, 2 finger sandwich recipes that are low carb, low sugar, and keep costs below $3 per person. Is this interesting to you?
Oh, it is.
Brainstorming, it doesn't mean
1, green tea. 2, herbal tea. 3, whatever that is, Rubio's tea. Low carb, low sugar finger sandwiches. There's one cucumber sandwich. There's another one. There's a smoked salmon and avocado lettuce wrap. There's the instructions how to make it. Here we go. The cost calculation to keep costs below $3 a person. You should make them with affordable ingredients. Additionally, you can consider providing some low-cost, low-sugar snacks like fresh fruit, cheeses, blah, blah, blah. Done. Think about that. She could do that. She could take that and hand it to anybody and say, this is what I want done. And how much time has she just had to spend on that? Whereas before, she probably would have to call a meeting, right, and say, you know, okay, come on, I want you to come in, let's go over what we're going to do. How do you want to do this? How do you want to do, right? And this is not taking anyone's job, it's making someone's job that much easier so they can do more.
The fun stuff.
The fun stuff. The important stuff, too. Like, you know, I bet I guarantee you there's things on her plate that every year she sits down, probably at some point in the year, and says, oh, what do I want to accomplish this year? And every year there's a holdover from the year before that she just hasn't been able to get to, and it's always been there and she's wanted to get to it. These types of things let you do that. You know? So again, you just have to, you know, tell it to be truthful. That's the important thing. Give it some examples, right? What we used here, you didn't really need truthfulness. If we were talking about a medical diagnosis or something, we would.
And it'll tell you, there's all sorts of guardrails on it. Like, it's not gonna, you don't want this to, like, diagnose anything. And it'll even say, it always puts little things on saying, I'm an AI, experimental, my information only goes up to 2021, I think is the last time they kind of fed it with info. So it really doesn't have a lot of current stuff. So, you know, the message out to people is, it's a machine, it's a tool, but don't go thinking that it's a magic tool and that it can do everything better. As those lawyers found out, to their consternation, sometimes it just hallucinates. And that's another thing that the scientists don't know why it does it. They can't answer to you why it doesn't. If it can't find the information out there, it just makes it up. And if you don't know and you think everything it says is truthful, it's weird.